So gray matter of the spinal cord in a transverse section is in the form of H, with dorsal column and anterior gray column of the two sides being the limbs of the H, whereas the central gray commissure uniting the two halves of the gray matter across the midline is the stem of the H. So starting with the different structures associated with the gray matter. The gray matter comprises of an anterior or ventral gray column, posterior dorsal gray column, lateral gray column, gray commissure, and a central canal leading to terminal ventricle. You must be familiar with all these terms associated with the gray matter of the spinal cord, because any of these terms can be asked or given in the MCQs. So anterior gray column, here we have the anterior gray column. Anterior gray column is a large ventral mass of the gray matter, and it does not reach the surface of the spinal cord. Whereas the posterior gray column, which is also called the dorsal gray column or the dorsal gray horn of the gray matter, is a narrow, elongated mass of gray matter that actually reaches the or extends till the surface of the spinal cord. Lateral gray column is present at certain levels within the spinal cord, and it is a small lateral projection of the gray matter that is located between the anterior gray column and posterior or dorsal horn of the gray matter. What about gray commissure? What is gray commissure? Where is it present? What is its function? Gray commissure, as I described earlier in the start of the lecture, forms the stem of the H shape. It connects the two halves, right and left, of the spinal cord's gray matter across the midline and is traversed further in the midline by this gap you can see in the diagram, a very narrow, small opening shown in the center of the gray commissure. This is central canal, which is shown to be traversing the gray commissure. It passes through the gray commissure. I hope these points so far are clear to everybody, both second year MBBS and BBS. Central canal, you must know a few structures or things or facts related with the central canal. Central canal, as I mentioned earlier, traverses or pierces or passes through the gray commissure. Superiorly, it is continuous with this small narrow central canal in the lower part of medulla oblongata. Inferiorly, it expands to form the terminal ventricle. So superiorly, central canal of the spinal cord is continuous with that of the medulla oblongata. Whereas in the lower part, in its lower limit, it is expanded, and here we give it another name, that is terminal ventricle. Terminal ventricle comes to lie within the conus medullaris of the spinal cord, which was the tapering cone-like end of the spinal cord. And the cavity of the conus medullaris is called terminal ventricle. It may run for a short distance in the phylum terminale. Terminal ventricle along with the central canal above may continue for a few millimeters or some distance into the phylum terminale. And what was phylum terminale? Phylum terminale was the extension of the pia mater from the tip of the conus medullaris till the posterior surface of the coccyx. Central canal is lined internally by the ependyma. I'm sure you must be familiar with this term, ependyma. So, this was a few features related with the gray matter of the spinal cord, which is H-shaped. Now let's talk about the white matter of the spinal cord. Gray matter of the spinal cord externally is surrounded by the white matter. I hope you know the difference between the gray matter and the white matter. Why is it called gray, or it is gray in appearance, and why is it called white? White contains the myelinated neuronal fibers, whereas the gray matter contains mainly the neuronal cell bodies. So white matter is divided into two halves by anterior median fissure and posteriorly by posterior median sulcus, further extending till the gray commissure posteriorly, where it changes its name and is called posterior median septum. So posteriorly, with the help of posterior median septum arising from the posterior median sulcus and anteriorly anterior median fissure, white matter is divided into two halves, right and left. Now, what is a funiculus? The white matter, the parts of the white matter present between the different columns or horns of the gray matter and anterior median fissure anteriorly and posterior median septum posteriorly. These columns are called funiculi, or a single column is called funiculus. So we have at least 3 funiculi. The part of the white matter that is present between the dorsal gray horn and posterior median septum is called posterior funiculus or posterior dorsal white column. The part of the white matter present between the anterior motor horn of the gray matter and anterior median fissure. Here, this part of the white matter is labeled as anterior white column or anterior funiculus. Whereas the part of the white matter that lies between the two horns, anterior and posterior, is called lateral white column or lateral funiculus. Sometimes lateral funiculus and anterior funiculus, that is lateral white column and anterior white column, are given a combined name, which is anterolateral white column or anterolateral funiculus. So I hope these different terminologies associated with the gray matter and white matter of the spinal cord must be clear to you. What about the white commissure, we had a gray commissure in the center, joining the two halves of the gray matter, right and left halves of the gray matter. What about a white commissure? Is there a white commissure present too? Yes. Most of the cases, there is a ventral white commissure. What is that? The part of the white matter lying anterior to gray commissure, or simply gray commissure, between the gray commissure and anterior median fissure. This part of white matter is labeled as ventral white commissure. Whereas posteriorly, we have no dorsal white commissure because of the extent of the posterior median septum. But at some levels of the spinal cord, this posterior median septum may be incomplete, especially its extent till the gray commissure. So in those cases, there can be presence of a dorsal white commissure or posterior white commissure, which is located posterior to or dorsal to gray commissure. I hope so far these terminologies with the internal features of white and gray matter must be clear to you.